Hello students, welcome to Drishti IAS. My name is Saloni Nandkyoliar and in this session we're going to talk about the National Pollution Control Day. We will see which tragedy led to the observance of this day and have we really learnt anything from that incident? So every year the 2nd of December is observed as the National Pollution Control Day. And which tragedy led to the observance of this day? So it was the unfortunate incident of the Bhopal Gas Tragedy, one of the worst industrial disasters in the history of the world, which took place on the 2nd and 3rd of December 1984. Bhopal Gas Tragedy. Thousands of people lost their lives and lakhs of people were exposed to a toxic gas, which was methyl isocyanate. Methyl isocyanate, which leaked from a pesticide plant, the Union Carbide factory. Thousands of people died and lakhs of people because they were exposed to this toxic gas. Till date, they have been surviving with chronic disorders. Chronic disorders like neurological disorders, respiratory disorders, reproductive disorders, and even cancer. That is why every year, the 2nd of December is observed as the National Pollution Control Day, because we want to raise awareness about all forms of pollution as well as industrial disasters. And we also want to honor the survivors of this tragedy. So this year, what was the theme? The theme was sustainable living for a greener future. Sustainable living for a greener future was the theme for this year's National Pollution Control Day, and Bhopal gas tragedy led to the observance of this National Pollution Control Day. Now, have we really learned anything from that incident? So for that, we'll have to look at the pollution control laws in India. There were some laws which existed before the tragedy, and then there were some laws that were enacted after the tragedy. So let us talk about all those things here. Let's look at the emergence of the pollution control laws in India. We'll talk about them in a chronological order. The first law, the first pollution control law that we had in India was the Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act of 1974. Enacted before the tragedy, Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1974, which aimed at safeguarding our water bodies and our groundwater also from all forms of hazardous discharge that goes into them. Industrial discharge or domestic discharge that basically pollutes our water bodies and groundwater comes under the ambit of the Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1974. And under this act only, there is an important statutory body which has been created, the Central Pollution Control Board, which deals with all forms of pollution. At the moment, we have the Central Pollution Control Board. Now, after this, another act was enacted, which was the Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1981. Before the tragedy, Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1981, as the name suggests, deals with curbing air pollution. Deals with monitoring the AQI standards and also penalizing the violators. It deals specifically with air pollution. Then after the Bhopal gas tragedy, an important act was enacted. This was an umbrella environmental legislation, and I'm talking about the Environment Protection Act of 1986. This is the umbrella legislation, umbrella environmental legislation, because this gives government the powers to set standards and emission targets for the companies, for the manufacturers, etc., for the industries, and then it also gives powers to the government to penalize the violators. This is the Environment Protection Act of 1986. Then there is another problem when a disaster happens, another significant problem, which is about compensating the victims. Who is going to take the accountability to compensate the victims? So for that, we have the Public Liability Insurance Act of 1991, also enacted after the Bhopal Gas Tragedy, and this specifically deals with fixing the accountability when it comes to compensating the victims. And it says that the industries or the companies that have caused this disaster, or that have basically owned the substances that caused the disaster, are going to pay the victims. So they are going to compensate. Compensation has to be given by the companies with immediate effect. And this works on a very important principle, which is the no fault liability principle. Now, what do we mean by the no fault liability principle? So please understand that there's a very common scenario. Whenever a disaster happens, nobody wants to take the accountability, because if these companies or these industries, if they take the accountability, they'll have to pay the compensation, and they don't really want that. So in order to deal with this problem, this act was enacted, and this no fault liability principle basically means that if a disaster has happened because of any chemical leak, any gas leak, any industrial disaster has happened, then the company or that industry which owns the substance that caused the disaster will have to compensate the victims, even if the victims have failed to prove the fault. So it is not necessary for the victims to prove whose fault it was, whose negligence it was. Nobody cares. This is not based on the proving of fault over here. Even if the victims cannot prove the fault, but the substance that caused that disaster, the company or the industry that owns that substance will have to pay the compensation to the victims with immediate effect. This is the no fault liability principle. So as to fix the accountability whenever such a disaster happens, we deal with the Public Liability Insurance Act. And this means that the companies over here, all these industries that are dealing with substances, they need to maintain a insurance coverage. They need to maintain an insurance coverage so that they can compensate the victims. And at the same time, they also need to pool in some money for the Environment Relief Fund. Environment Relief Fund is a national fund, and these companies, these industries, they have to pay an insurance premium for the public insurance that they have taken from the company, and then they also have to pay an amount equal to that premium to this Environment Relief Fund also, which is going to be active whenever these companies fall short of compensating the victims. Money from this fund is also going to be taken out, and the government is also going to compensate the victims, and the government is going to take help of this fund, and this fund is going to receive transfers from the companies, which means that the companies need to maintain an insurance coverage. The accountability goes on to the companies. Okay, then we have the National Green Tribunal of 2010. National Green Tribunal is for hearing environmental cases. So this is for providing environmental justice. Environmental justice. A speedy trial of environmental cases. The goal basically is to dispose of cases within 6 months of their filing. So a speedy trial is aimed over here. Speedy trial of an environmental cases, and this works on the principle of natural justice. The National Green Tribunal works on the principles of natural justice. And finally, we also have the hazardous waste management rules of 2016, which specifically deal with the hazardous waste handling and the hazardous waste disposal. So these are the basic broad pollution control laws that we have in India. We have laws for water prevention, we have laws for water pollution, for air pollution, for broader environmental pollution. We also have laws for fixing the accountability for compensation. So this has been something that the country has been doing even before the tragedy and now after the tragedy also. But we need to understand this is a multi-stakeholder problem. When it comes to environment, when it comes to pollution, a lot of people over here are stakeholders. The government is the stakeholder, the companies, the industries are the stakeholder, and citizens also are the stakeholders. So everybody needs to do their bit in order to contribute to a cleaner and a safer environment. So that was all for this video. I hope you all enjoyed everything that we discussed over here. Now let us practice a question for prelims. With reference to the Bhopal gas tragedy and the environmental laws enacted thereafter, consider the following statements. 1. The Environment Protection Act 1986 was enacted as a direct legislative response to the Bhopal gas tragedy. 2. The Public Liability Insurance Act 1991 provides for a no-fault liability and mandates industries handling hazardous substances to take insurance policies. Which of the statements given above is or are correct? A. 1 only, B. 2 only, C. both 1 and 2, or D. neither 1 nor 2. Please provide your answers in the comments section and we will meet in a new video. Thank you for watching.
For more informative content, like, share and subscribe, and do not forget to press the bell icon to get the notifications.